Everything about the moment made it seem like Drake had it locked in. The energy, the reactions, the way the room leaned toward him, it all felt like a setup for another win. Cameras were already focused, fans were anticipating the celebration, and even the atmosphere carried that quiet certainty. This was Drake's moment. You could see it in the confidence, the way he carried himself, the expectation in the air, the feeling that everything was aligning exactly how it was supposed to. For a few seconds, it looked like there was no question about it. The outcome felt decided before it was even announced. And then, everything changed. The envelope opened. The pause stretched just long enough to build tension. And then one name echoed through the room: Kendrick Lamar. In that instant, the entire atmosphere flipped. What felt certain suddenly felt unpredictable. The cameras shifted, the reactions changed, and the energy that had been building around Drake didn't disappear. It redirected. All at once, the focus moved somewhere else. That's what made this moment so powerful. It wasn't just about who won, it was about how quickly the narrative changed. 1 second, Drake was the center of attention. The next, Kendrick had taken over without even needing to compete for it in that moment. It felt sudden, almost unreal, like the room itself had to adjust in real time. And Drake's reaction? That's what everyone started talking about immediately. The slight pause, the expression, the split-second realization, it didn't go unnoticed. Fans replayed it, analyzed it, zoomed in on every detail. Because sometimes, it's not just the announcement that defines the moment. It's how people respond to it. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips circulated everywhere, captions highlighting the shock, the shift, the unexpected turn. People weren't just reacting, they were reliving the exact second everything changed. Because that's what it felt like, a turning point. Moments like this don't just happen, they stick. They become part of a bigger narrative, something fans refer back to again and again. And in this case, it wasn't just about a name being called. It was about how one name, Kendrick Lamar, was enough to completely flip the story in seconds. The build-up to that moment didn't feel accidental. It felt engineered by expectation. From the second the category was announced, everything in the room seemed to lean toward Drake. The cameras found him almost instantly. The audience reactions subtly centered around him, and even the tone of the presenters hinted at what many believed was inevitable. It wasn't just that Drake was nominated. It was that he felt like the winner before anything had even been confirmed. That kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. Drake has built a reputation over the years for dominating moments like this. Awards shows, major announcements, headline performances. He knows how to exist in those spaces in a way that makes him feel like the natural focal point. It's a mix of presence, experience, and the kind of visibility that keeps him constantly at the center of the conversation. So when his name was in the mix, the assumption wasn't surprising. It felt logical. But that's exactly what made what happened next so powerful. As the presenter began to speak, the room quieted just enough to let the tension settle in. It was that familiar pause, the one designed to stretch the moment, to let anticipation build just a little longer. Drake's posture reflected that expectation. Calm, composed, ready. Not overly reactive, not nervous, just prepared. It was the body language of someone who has been in this position before and knows how it usually plays out. And for a split second, it seemed like nothing would interrupt that pattern. But then came the name, Kendrick Lamar. The shift was immediate, almost jarring. You could feel it before you could even fully process it. The energy in the room didn't disappear, it redirected. The focus that had been locked onto Drake snapped somewhere else, like a spotlight suddenly changing direction. And in that moment, the certainty that had been building all night dissolved instantly. What made this even more intense was how quickly the audience reacted. There was a brief hesitation, a collective moment of recalibration, and then the realization set in. Kendrick had won. Not Drake. Not the expected outcome. Something else entirely. And that realization carried weight. Not just because of the result, but because of what it disrupted. Drake's reaction became part of the story almost immediately. It wasn't exaggerated or dramatic, but it didn't need to be. The smallest pause, the slightest change in expression. That was enough. Fans watching live and online picked up on it instantly. Because in moments like this, subtlety speaks louder than anything else. It wasn't about what he said, it was about what he didn't say, what he showed for just a fraction of a second. Meanwhile, Kendrick's name continued to echo through the moment. Even without a grand reaction or an over-the-top celebration, his presence became dominant. It didn't feel forced. It felt natural, like the narrative had simply decided to shift in his direction. And that's what made it so impactful. It wasn't about competing for attention. It was about taking it without resistance. Social media reacted in real time. Clips of the exact moment flooded timelines within minutes. People replayed the announcement, slowed it down, zoomed in on reactions, analyzed every frame. It wasn't just about who won. It was about how unexpected it felt and how quickly everything changed. That's the kind of moment that doesn't just pass. It sticks. What's interesting is how this moment highlights the difference between expectation and reality. Drake represented the expected outcome. His presence, his track record, his momentum, all of it pointed toward him. Kendrick represented something else: unpredictability. The ability to disrupt a narrative that seemed already decided. And in that moment, unpredictability won. The audience felt that contrast. It's why the reaction wasn't just excitement, it was surprise. Because people don't just remember what happens, they remember when what happens breaks what they thought was going to happen. And that's exactly what this was. A break in expectation, a shift in control. Even beyond the room, the impact kept growing. Discussions weren't just about the award, they were about what it meant. Was this a statement? A shift in momentum? A reminder of Kendrick's influence? Fans and analysts started connecting this moment to the larger dynamic between the two artists, turning a single announcement into part of a much bigger story. And that's where the real power of this moment lies. It didn't exist in isolation. It became a reference point, something people will look back on and say, that's when everything changed. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was unexpected and decisive. By the time the moment settled, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about an award being given. It was about a narrative being flipped in real time. Drake went from the assumed winner to the observer of a moment that had shifted away from him. Kendrick went from a name in the category to the center of attention. And it all happened in seconds. That's what made it unforgettable. What happened after the announcement is where the moment truly started to take on a life of its own. Because it wasn't just about Kendrick Lamar winning. It was about how quickly the entire narrative reshaped itself around that outcome. Within seconds, the focus of the room, the cameras, and even the conversations shifted completely. At first, there was that brief pause, the kind where people are still processing what they just heard. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you're paying close attention. But it matters, because in that pause, expectation and reality collide. Everything people thought was about to happen suddenly doesn't, and the mind has to catch up. Then the reactions begin. Applause rises, people stand, cameras cut to different angles. And just like that, the moment starts to belong to Kendrick. Not gradually, instantly. That's the part that stands out the most. There's no slow transition, no easing into it. It's a complete shift, like flipping a switch. Meanwhile, Drake is still in the frame, still present, but no longer the center. And that's where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Just seconds earlier, everything pointed toward him. Now, he's part of the background of a moment that has moved on without him. That kind of shift is rare, and it's what makes moments like this so powerful. Because it's not just about losing, it's about how quickly control of the narrative can change. Drake didn't do anything wrong. He didn't falter or misstep. The outcome simply didn't align with expectation. And in that misalignment, the story rewrote itself. Fans watching live felt that shift immediately. You could see it in the way people reacted online. At first, confusion, then surprise, then analysis. Clips of the announcement started circulating within minutes, each one focusing on a slightly different detail. The way the name was said, the reactions in the crowd, the expressions on both artists' faces. It became more than a moment. it became a subject of study. And the more people watched it, the more layers they found. The timing of the pause before the name was read. The subtle shift in body language from Drake. The way Kendrick's name seemed to carry weight even before the applause fully kicked in. Every detail added to the narrative, turning a few seconds into something that could be replayed and discussed endlessly. This is where Kendrick's presence becomes even more significant. He didn't need to do anything extra. He didn't need a dramatic reaction or a big speech in that exact moment. The impact came from the contrast itself, from the fact that his name disrupted an expectation that felt almost guaranteed. That kind of disruption creates its own energy. It also reinforces something fans have been saying for a long time. Kendrick doesn't move like everyone else. His influence isn't always about frequency or visibility. It's about impact. And moments like this highlight that perfectly. He can step into a space, change the direction of the conversation, and leave a lasting impression without needing to dominate every second of it. For Drake, this moment adds a different layer to his narrative. Not a negative one, but a complex one. Because when you're used to being the expected outcome, moments where that expectation is broken stand out more. They get remembered, they get replayed, and they become part of a larger story about competition, perception, and timing. That's exactly what started happening here. Fans didn't just see this as an isolated result. They connected it to the broader dynamic between Drake and Kendrick. Discussions began forming almost instantly. Was this a statement? A shift in momentum? A reminder of Kendrick's position in the industry? Whether those interpretations are accurate or not almost doesn't matter. What matters is that the moment created space for those conversations to happen. And once those conversations start, they take on a life of their own. Another important detail is how quickly the moment extended beyond the room. Within minutes, it wasn't just the people at the event experiencing it. It was millions of viewers online. Social media turned it into a global moment almost instantly. Different angles, different reactions, different edits, all contributing to a single shared narrative. And in that digital space, the moment became even bigger. People slowed it down, zoomed in, added captions, created theories. It wasn't just replayed, it was reinterpreted. Each person saw something slightly different, and those differences kept the conversation alive. That's the power of a moment like this. It doesn't stay contained. It expands. It evolves. It becomes something that people return to, not just because of what happened, but because of how it felt when it happened. By the time everything settled, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another award announcement. It was a turning point in perception. A moment where expectation met reality and lost. A moment where Kendrick's name didn't just win. It changed the direction of the entire conversation. And for Drake, it was a reminder of something important. No matter how certain a moment feels, it can always change in an instant. As the moment continued to unfold, it became clear that what had just happened wasn't fading. It was growing. The announcement of Kendrick Lamar's name didn't just end with applause or a speech. It carried forward, expanding into conversations, reactions, and interpretations that made the moment feel even bigger minutes after it actually happened. Inside the room, the shift was still settling. People who had expected one outcome were now adjusting to another. Conversations began immediately. Quick exchanges, surprised expressions, subtle reactions that revealed just how unexpected the result had been. And even as the event continued, there was a lingering sense that something important had just taken place. Not loud, not chaotic, but significant. Kendrick's presence in that moment didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like he took something. It felt like the moment naturally moved toward him. That's a different kind of dominance. It's not about competing for attention. It's about becoming the center of it without resistance. And that's exactly what happened. His name alone was enough to shift everything. At the same time, Drake remained part of the frame. And that contrast only made the moment more powerful. Because viewers weren't just seeing Kendrick win. They were seeing the transition from expectation to reality play out in real time. Drake represented what people thought would happen. Kendrick represented what actually did. And that gap between those two things is where the impact lived. Fans online began breaking the moment down almost instantly. Not just reacting, but analyzing. Every second was being replayed. The pause before the announcement, the tone of the presenter's voice, the exact timing of the name being called. Even the smallest details were being turned into discussion points. Because when something unexpected happens, people want to understand it. They want to find meaning in it. And meaning is exactly what started to form around this moment. Some fans saw it as a statement, proof that Kendrick's influence doesn't depend on constant visibility. Others saw it as a reminder that no matter how dominant someone like Drake appears, there's always space for the narrative to shift. Different interpretations emerged, but they all pointed to the same core idea. This moment mattered. It also started to reshape how people were talking about both artists. Drake's consistency, his constant presence, his ability to stay in the spotlight, it all remained true. But now, it was being viewed alongside this moment of unpredictability, a reminder that dominance doesn't guarantee outcomes, that even the most expected result can be overturned in seconds. For Kendrick, the moment reinforced something fans have believed for a long time, that he doesn't need to be everywhere to matter. He doesn't need to dominate every headline or release constantly to stay relevant. His impact comes from moments like this, where timing and presence align perfectly to create something memorable. And that's why this moment kept growing even after it ended. Because it wasn't just about the award, it was about what the award represented. It became a symbol of unpredictability, of narrative shifts, of the idea that control over attention can change hands at any time. Social media amplified all of this. Clips spread across platforms, each one highlighting a slightly different aspect of the moment. Some focused on Kendrick, others focused on Drake's reaction. Some zoomed in on the audience, others added dramatic captions that made the moment feel even bigger. And as more people saw it, the interpretations multiplied. The moment wasn't just being watched, it was being recreated through different perspectives. Each version added something new, keeping the conversation alive longer than a typical award announcement ever would. What's interesting is how quickly this became part of a larger story. It wasn't treated as an isolated event. Instead, it was connected to everything that had come before. The history between Kendrick and Drake, their different approaches to the industry, their contrasting styles of maintaining influence. That connection gave the moment depth. It turned a few seconds into something that felt like a chapter in an ongoing narrative. And once something becomes part of a narrative, it doesn't fade. It stays relevant. It gets referenced, revisited, and remembered. Even people who weren't watching live started to feel like they had missed something important. That's another sign of a powerful moment. It creates a sense of urgency, a feeling that you should have been there. And when people go back to watch it, they don't just see it, they feel the reactions, the tension, the shift that happened in real time. By this point, it was clear that this wasn't just about who won. It was about how quickly perception can change, how confidence can turn into surprise, how expectation can be replaced by reality in a single sentence. And that's what makes moments like this last. Not the result itself, but the way it happened, the speed of the shift, the contrast between what was expected and what actually occurred. Because in the end, this wasn't just Kendrick winning an award. It was Kendrick taking a moment that didn't seem like his and making it unforgettable. By the time the moment had fully settled, it was clear that what happened wasn't just staying inside that room. It was turning into something much bigger. The announcement of Kendrick Lamar's name had already moved beyond a simple win. It had become a reference point, a moment people would keep coming back to whenever conversations about dominance, timing, and influence came up. Inside the venue, things returned to normal on the surface. The show continued, presenters moved on, and the structure of the event carried forward. But underneath that structure, the energy had changed. There was a subtle shift in how people were engaging, a quiet awareness that something unexpected had just taken place. Moments like that don't disappear just because the schedule moves on. They linger. And that lingering feeling is what made everything afterward feel slightly different. Every camera cut, every reaction shot, every glance toward the crowd carried a little more meaning. Because now, everyone in that room, and everyone watching knew that the narrative wasn't as predictable as it had seemed just minutes earlier. For Drake, this created a unique position. He was still present, still composed, still carrying himself with the same confidence he always does. But now, that confidence existed in a different context. Instead of being tied to an expected win, it became part of how he handled an unexpected outcome. And in moments like this, how someone handles the shift can be just as important as the shift itself. Fans picked up on that instantly. Conversations weren't just about Kendrick anymore, they were about Drake too. About his reaction, his composure, the way he processed the moment in real time. Some saw it as professionalism, others as quiet disappointment, and some simply as a reminder that even the most dominant figures aren't immune to unpredictability. At the same time, Kendrick's presence continued to grow, even without needing to do anything more. That's the interesting part. His impact didn't rely on extending the moment or amplifying it himself. The moment expanded on its own. People kept talking about it, replaying it, analyzing it. His name became the center of conversations that stretched far beyond the initial announcement. This is where the difference between presence and impact becomes clear. Drake's presence is constant. He's always there, always active, always part of the conversation. Kendrick's impact is selective, but when it hits in a way that reshapes the conversation entirely. And this moment highlighted that difference perfectly. As the clips continued to circulate online, the narrative kept evolving. What started as surprise turned into interpretation. People began asking bigger questions. Was this a turning point? A shift in momentum? A sign of something larger happening beneath the surface? Whether those questions had clear answers didn't matter. What mattered was that the moment created them. It opened the door for deeper discussion, for analysis that went beyond the surface level of who won. It turned a result into a conversation. And once a moment becomes a conversation, it gains longevity. It doesn't fade after a day or two. It sticks. It gets referenced in future discussions, brought up in comparisons, used as an example of how quickly things can change. That's how moments become part of a larger narrative. For fans, this added another layer of appreciation. Not just for Kendrick's win, but for the way it happened. The timing, the contrast, the unpredictability, it all came together in a way that felt almost cinematic. Like something that couldn't have been scripted better if it tried. At the same time, there's an underlying respect for both sides of the moment. Because while Kendrick's name changed the direction of the narrative, Drake's presence gave that shift something to contrast against. Without that expectation, without that sense that Drake had it locked in, the moment wouldn't have carried the same weight. That's what makes it so powerful. It wasn't just about one artist rising. It was about the interaction between expectation and reality, between confidence and surprise, between what seemed certain and what actually happened. As the night moved on and eventually came to an end, the moment didn't disappear. It followed people out of the venue, onto their phones, into conversations, across platforms. It became something that lived beyond the event itself. And that's when you know a moment truly mattered. Not when it happens, but when it keeps happening after it's over. Because even hours later, people were still watching that clip, still talking about it, still breaking it down, still feeling that same shift that happened in real time. And in the center of all of it was one simple turning point, one name being called that changed everything. Kendrick Lamar. As everything begins to settle and the noise slowly fades, what remains isn't just the memory of who won. It's the feeling of how quickly everything changed. That single moment, when Kendrick Lamar's name was called, continues to echo far beyond the stage. Because it didn't just end with applause or reactions. It left behind a shift in perception that people are still trying to fully process. What makes this moment so powerful is how complete it feels. Not in the sense of closure, but in the sense that everything aligned perfectly to create something unforgettable. The expectation, the tension, the surprise, the reactions, all of it came together in a way that turned a few seconds into something much bigger. And once a moment reaches that level, it stops being temporary. It becomes part of the story. For fans, this has turned into more than just a highlight. It's become a reference point. Whenever conversations about dominance, unpredictability, or influence come up, this moment will be part of that discussion. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it revealed something real, that no matter how certain something feels, it can always change in an instant. At the same time, Drake's role in this moment adds another layer to its impact. His presence, his confidence, and the expectation surrounding him are what made the shift so noticeable. Without that build-up, the outcome wouldn't have carried the same weight. And because of that, this moment doesn't diminish his position. It actually highlights the level he operates on. Only someone consistently expected to win can create a moment this powerful when they don't. That's what makes the dynamic between these two artists so compelling. Drake represents consistency, visibility, and an ongoing presence that keeps him at the center of attention. Kendrick represents precision, timing, and the ability to step in and reshape the conversation with a single move. And in this moment, those two approaches collided in a way that created something unforgettable. As the clip continues to circulate and the discussions continue to grow, the meaning of the moment keeps evolving. Some see it as a turning point, others as a reminder, and some simply as proof that unpredictability still exists in a space that often feels controlled. But regardless of interpretation, one thing remains constant: people are still talking about it. And that's the true measure of impact. Not just what happens in the moment, but how long it continues to matter afterward. This wasn't a moment that people watched once and moved on from. It's one they keep returning to, analyzing, rewatching, and reinterpreting. Every time they do, it gains a little more weight, a little more meaning. There's also something deeper happening here, something that goes beyond awards or reactions. This moment is a reminder of why people stay invested in moments like these in the first place. Because every now and then, something happens that breaks the pattern. Something that reminds everyone that outcomes aren't always predictable, that narratives aren't always fixed. And when that happens, it creates a kind of excitement that can't be manufactured. It feels real, it feels earned, and it stays with people long after the moment itself has passed. As time goes on, this will become one of those moments that gets referenced again and again. Not just for what happened, but for how it felt to witness it. The tension before the announcement, the shift when the name was called, the reactions that followed. It all becomes part of a shared memory that fans carry with them. And for Kendrick, this moment reinforces something that has always been true about his presence. He doesn't need to dominate every second to leave a lasting impact. Sometimes, all it takes is one perfectly timed moment to remind everyone exactly who he is and what he represents. For Drake, it adds another chapter to an already complex and evolving narrative. A reminder that even at the highest level, nothing is guaranteed. And that unpredictability is part of what makes moments like these so compelling. In the end, this wasn't just about an award being given. It was about a moment that shifted perception, challenged expectation, and created something that will be remembered long after the details fade. Because sometimes, the biggest moments aren't the ones you see coming. They're the ones that change everything the second they happen. That moment wasn't just unexpected, it changed everything in seconds. Kendrick Lamar didn't just hear his name called. He flipped the entire narrative, right in front of everyone. And while Drake looked like he had it locked in, this proved that nothing is ever guaranteed at the top. But now it's your turn. What did you see in that moment? Was it a shift in power, or just one unforgettable surprise? Make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop your thoughts below. Because if one name being called can change everything like this, imagine what happens next.